Aside, of course, from the 1st century, the 4th century is almost certainly the most important century in Christian history, probably the most important century in Western history, and arguably the most important century in the history of the entire world. The monumental events of this century created great ripple effects that continue to have consequences today. The towering figures of the 4th century continue to be major shaping influences in Christian thought and in the Western mind and culture in general. It is because of the events and people of the 4th century that the world is as we know it today. Because of this, I've decided that I just can't fit all of these giants into a single video. In this video, I'll be covering the years 300 to 350, and in my next video, I'll cover the second half of the 4th century. The 4th century opened for the Christian Church on notes of both hope and defeat. In 301, because of the work of St. Gregory the Illuminator, the king of Armenia, Tiridates III, converted to Christianity and proclaimed it the official religion of Armenia, making Armenia the first officially Christian nation in the world. St. Tiridates would work tirelessly to spread the Christian faith amongst the people of his land until his death in 330. While the Christians of Armenia were celebrating this great victory, the situation for Christians in the Roman Empire had reached its worst state yet. On February 23rd of 303, the Emperor Diocletian issued the first in what would become a series of 4 progressively more violent edicts against the Christians. Diocletian's first edict ordered the destruction of Christian churches and the burning of scriptures and liturgical books, as well as a ban on Christian worship assemblies. Christians were also deprived of their right to petition Roman courts, and Christians in the Roman government and military were stripped of their ranks and titles. The second edict followed in the summer of 303, in which Diocletian ordered the arrest and imprisonment of all Christian clergy, including bishops, priests, deacons, and even readers. A third edict followed not long after, in the fall of 303, in which it was promised that any of the imprisoned clergy who offered sacrifice to the pagan gods would be returned to freedom. The fourth and final edict issued by Diocletian, the culminating edict of the persecution, was sent out early in the following year, 304. In this edict, Diocletian ordered that all people, including men, women, and even children, were to gather into public places and offer sacrifices to the pagan gods. Those who refused, regardless of age or sex, were to be executed. This edict would remain in effect across the empire for almost 10 years, during which time thousands of Christian men, women, and children were tortured and executed for their faith. Long lists of the martyrs under Diocletian are still remembered in the Church's calendar to this day, and the horror and enormity of Diocletian's persecution is still remembered by Christians, who speak of this time as the Great Persecution. A persecution of such immensity would not be known by the Church again for hundreds of years. Diocletian retired from the imperial throne in 305, but the persecution was continued with a renewed fervency by his successor Galerius. In 306, a relatively young man named Constantine was proclaimed co-Roman emperor with Galerius by the Roman soldiers in Britain after the death of his father, the Caesar Constantius. Constantine, though not a Christian, immediately ended the persecution of Christians within the Roman territory under his control and ordered the restoration of all property that had been taken from them. He spent the next several years largely engrossed in battle after battle, defeating his rivals and challengers for the imperial throne and consolidating his power. In 312, shortly before one of the most important of these battles, he witnessed a vision of the Chi-Rho symbol, a Christian shorthand for the name of Christ, and the words, "In this sign, conquer." Before the battle, Constantine had the Chi-Rho placed on the shields and standards of his army, and indeed they marched into battle and emerged as victorious conquerors. In the following year, 313, Constantine issued the Edict of Milan, an official proclamation of religious toleration for all people, including the Christians. The persecutions had finally come to an end. Licinius, co-emperor with Constantine, attempted to revive persecution of Christians in 320, largely as a means by which to incite Constantine, but he was swiftly defeated by Constantine's army in 324. After the defeat of Licinius, Constantine became sole ruler of the Roman Empire. Having finally consolidated his imperial power, Constantine now set about setting affairs in order. Part of this was calling the first ecumenical or worldwide council of the Christian Church in the city of Nicaea in 325, in order to finally settle an issue that seemed to be tearing the Christian Church apart. In 311, a man named Arius, a deacon in the Church of Alexandria, had begun teaching some rather novel ideas about Christ and about the Trinity, being influenced by Origen in his philosophy and by Platonism. Arius posited that Christ was a created being, and although he was still divine, he was not quite as divine as the Father. He was something of a middle being between God and man. As a result of this heretical teaching, Arius was excommunicated by the bishop of Alexandria. Rather than being silenced, however, Arius had protested, and loudly. Arius set about trying to spread his new pseudo-Christian theology far and wide, gathering as many supporters as he could, amongst whom were even a few bishops he had been able to convince. By the time that Constantine stepped in 325, the church was on the verge of schism. In order to resolve the matter, Constantine called together all of the bishops of the world for the first ecumenical council at Nicaea. The gathering was huge. In addition to 318 bishops present, there were thousands of priests and deacons and other minor clergy, and innumerable laity present. The bishops proclaimed, as Christians had held since the earliest times, that Christ is uncreated, co-equal and co-eternal with God the Father. They excommunicated Arius as a heretic. Unfortunately, the debate would continue for many years to come, with the Arians at several points gaining the upper hand, including under Constantine's son and successor Constantius II, who himself was an Arian and attempted to suppress the Orthodox Church. Constantine himself also later attempted to have Arius readmitted to communion. Arius fell sick and died before he was able to partake. Constantine himself passed away in 337. He was finally baptized shortly before he died. Constantine spent nearly his entire life fighting an uphill battle, first to become emperor, then to defeat his rivals, then to keep unity in the church and in the empire, and at the same time to implement as much as possible the ideals of Christianity in Roman life. To this latter purpose, he even went as far as moving the capital of the Roman Empire from the pagan-tainted city of Rome to the new Christian city of New Rome, or Constantinople. He also moderated the Roman legal system by deleting some of the more brutal laws, such as the penalty of crucifixion, a process that would not be completed until 2 centuries later in the reign of the Emperor St. Justinian. Much of this uphill battle was also fought while walking on a tightrope, as he sought to live his Christian faith while not alienating his still largely pagan subjects. Whatever the final verdict on how well Constantine did in all of these complicated situations, there is little doubt that he is deserving of the way he is remembered in the Christian Church, as St. Constantine the Great, equal to the apostles. Also at this time, another great kingdom was converted to Christianity. In 316, while traveling off the coast of Africa, 2 Christian brothers, Frumentius and Odysseus, were shipwrecked on the shore and taken captive to the court of the king of Ethiopia. They continued to practice their Christian faith and spoke about it in the royal court, soon converting several members of the royal family, including the queen. Eventually, the king himself, Saint Ezana, converted and proclaimed Christianity the official faith of Ethiopia. Saint Frumentius was consecrated as the first bishop of Ethiopia by Saint Athanasius, bishop of Alexandria, in 330. All over North Africa, the Middle East, and Europe, everywhere Christianity went, the old, stale pagan superstitions were dying off and being replaced by the new and fresh illumination of Christianity. Paganism's final dying gasp would soon be heard.